Boom. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Like Nigel said, I've been at a number of the product camps. I'm really excited to be back. Actually, I lived in New York for a while, and my first introduction to Chicago was a bar camp back in the day, which is a similar conference. And I remember sleeping overnight with the sleeping bag and all that kind of stuff. And looking back, the number of relationships and the trajectory of my personal career, at least as it relates to Chicago, a lot of it had its kind of genesis there, and then at some of the product camps as well. So it's awesome that you all are here. Hopefully you'll all mingle and get to know each other, and there'll be some similar kind of long-term sort of benefits for you all as well. But yeah, so really excited to be here. Also really excited to be talking in the morning. Usually I teach, as you mentioned, under Kellogg, and it's like 6:30 to 9:30, and they've been working all day, and so they don't have a 2-foot rule, but they fall asleep. So it's a similar sort of vibe. But so yeah, no, really excited to be here. That's me. They had that hashtag for the PCamp Shy 2019. They want you to tweet things that people think are interesting. A lot of times people, though, I tend to talk quickly and cover a lot of material. We have 114 slides to cover. They're not, it can be hard to sometimes remember everything, so people will take my words out of context. So I've gone ahead and taken my words out of context for you and threw it out so that you can share them. But I'm recording it. I'm going to share it with Nigel and the team so they can share it with you also if there's stuff that you missed. Don't necessarily worry about trying to keep up with me and take notes, because I've had a lot of coffee. Okay, so just a short kind of story sort of about my career. There we go. Okay. So yeah, so I started off as a marketer who wanted to become a designer, and so I taught myself how to design and ended up being a creative director eventually, which was neat. But then when that happened, the whole Web 2.0 thing started happening, and I thought that looked neat, and so I taught myself how to code, and along with a couple other people at the company I was at in New York, we built a little startup inside of a startup. They were doing these like spam campaigns for universities for admissions to try to get you to want to go to their school. And we saw Friendster and thought that would be neat for accepted students before they got to school. If you're accepted to 3 different universities and they all basically the same, if you make friends before you get to school, at one of them you'd be more likely to go there. So that's what we built. And it's just this little small like rebel gang inside of this other organization, and it ended up doing really well. We had no idea what the hell we were doing, but learned a lot kind of in that process. And the company got acquired and became head of product, and so I kind of had this weird sort of progression over time that gives me, I think, a little bit of a unique lens on the world. I got acquired, got bought by private equity. I learned what it was like to work for a bank, and then decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And then I met my now partner, a guy named Joe Dwyer. He was a venture partner at OCA here in town, and he had this idea for kind of a novel type of venture fund that would provide cash, but also would provide team. And I get asked a lot of times, people look at my LinkedIn profile and they're like, how do I break into VC? And I think underneath that they were like, what the hell is this guy doing being a VC? And I think that was honestly something that I thought when we first got started too. I had, I don't know if any of you ever deal with imposter syndrome, but I totally did. And but I think Joe had a unique lens on the world, and one of the things that I think he saw at OCA was a lot of teams have this product piece missing, and he thought that the product role was going to become an increasingly valuable role inside of startups, and then eventually kind of inside of funds. So if you wanted to be a value add as a fund, having product knowledge would be really, really helpful. And so I've learned over the years that actually, I think it turned out to be true. I mean, there have been a lot of conversations where we're doing diligence on something, and there's a unique lens that I think I'm able to bring from having that kind of background in terms of seeing levers inside of a product, opportunities that maybe other people might miss when they're looking at a deal. And I think that that's going to become increasingly more common. And as a result of that, I actually think that you all are going to become even more valuable maybe than you already are. One of the things I've learned is that, or that I've come to believe, is that product people are going to become even more important than they already are. If you want to take that out of context. Share that. So just a story to kind of illustrate why. You've probably seen a chart like this before. It's like the chart that's in literally every single startup deck, the proverbial up and to the right. And this is actually a chart from a company that we were involved with on a consulting base. What? Okay. That we were involved with on a consulting basis. They had a really strong acquisition team, so they were really aggressive about testing channels, creative, targeting, all that kind of stuff. They had found some opportunities to acquire users pretty scalably at low cost. And so they had a chart that was looking like this. They were getting ready to fundraise. Everything was looking rosy. But one of the first things that we do when we get involved with a company, why are you not advancing? There we go, okay, is we want to look at retention. So if you've seen a chart like this before, it's a pretty typical retention chart. The fact that it's going down is not a problem. For those of you that don't know, this is basically a cohort of users, right? And the percentage of them that are still using the product over a period of time, it always goes down, right? But what matters is that it tapers off eventually, right? So that you can keep some of them, right? Their problem was, and this is kind of the way that we like to visualize this for people in a way that they can understand it, was that it wasn't necessarily tapering. And the problem is that you can't tell right away that that's a problem. If this is a single cohort of users and this is their kind of retention, and then you start to stack those cohorts on top of each other, it goes up and to the right for a while, right? And if it tapers, if each cohort tapers eventually, this isn't a problem. They start to stack on top of each other. That's a sustainable business. The problem was they weren't tapering. They were dropping all of them off the bottom here eventually. And what ended up happening was they needed to acquire more and more users in order to keep showing the rate of growth that they were needing to show. And that became increasingly difficult to do, right? You either have to have unlimited money, which they obviously didn't, they were going to need to raise money, or you need to find increasingly cost-effective channels for acquisition, which is also really, really difficult because channels tend to get more expensive, not less, over time, as more people come in and start advertising on them, and at the same time, users become more kind of blind to the advertisements. And so it ended up kind of being a situation like this, right? But it's sort of a lagging problem. You don't see it in the beginning. You don't really see it until it's too late. So for a while, you know, it's going up and to the right there. It looked great, right? But they didn't really realize that they were having a problem until it was almost too late. And it actually was too late in their case because they were starting to run low on cash. And so they were like, well, let's cut spend a little bit on acquisition so we can figure out this retention problem. When you cut spend and your charts look like this, it immediately goes off of a little bit of a cliff here, right? So that's a big problem. So just, you know, for people who are more, more visual learners or less, data-ish, this is what your experience is like if you're this company. Oh yeah, it's not a video because it's a PDF file right now. That guy goes off a cliff, so he's having a lot of fun, and then it's like going on. But anyway, this is actually a very common problem, and there's articles about this, about like the dangers of becoming addicted to paid acquisition and all that kind of stuff. Retention, the critical importance of retention, you all know that. But because this story has played itself out so many times, VCs have had to learn to have more robust models for evaluating companies, rather than just the simple kind of things like monthly active users and things like that. We'll skip that. If this is two different companies, right, and this is the chart that they would show us in their decks of monthly active users by month. They look pretty similar, right? Like they're almost identical. But they actually, you can have two completely different sets of details once you kind of dig underneath the surface. Social Capital is a fund out in San Francisco, and they, one of the models they like to use is called the quick ratio. And what they do is they break out monthly active users in terms of new users, resurrected users, and then churned users. And then they take new and resurrected, and then they divide that by churned, and then that gives us a quick ratio. And what this tells us is you want to have a quick ratio of about higher than 1. If you don't have a quick ratio higher than 1, you're churning more users than you're acquiring, and that is not a sustainable business long term. And that chart will end up looking like what we were showing you a little bit earlier, right? So this is company 1, right, which had that monthly active user number. It was very similar to company 2, but they're churning almost as fast as they're acquiring, which is a problem. Versus company 2. They're acquiring considerably fewer users, but their product is stickier. They're keeping them at a much higher rate. And so while company 1 had a quick ratio between like 1 and call it 1.25, this company has a quick ratio more in the lines of like 1.5 to 2, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a very meaningful difference. This is actually a more sustainable long-term company, and this is the company that you would probably want to invest in. So VCs have had to develop frameworks like this to get into things at a little more advanced level. You can do this in terms of revenue too. So this is a model for predicting or for breaking out monthly recurring revenue. So again, people love to show monthly recurring revenue charts that go up into the right? But if you break it out again, you can see obviously new and resurrected and churned. But then with revenue, you can also look at an individual, are your users' share of revenues expanding or contracting? In other words, am I spending more money each month or less money each month? That's a nuance that you can layer on top of it as well. And then you can actually have a monthly recurring revenue quick ratio too. For that, just as an aside, like a good benchmark is like over 4 would be a good quick ratio for a monthly recurring revenue type of thing. And so VCs are becoming more nuanced in terms of how they understand and how they do diligence on deals. And the reason why I think that matters to you, I think you should know at a minimum some of the frameworks that VCs are using to kind of evaluate this stuff. But more importantly, I think that what does this tell me? These are all levers in your control, right? So new users is a lever in my control. How do I get my churned users to come back or minimize my churned users is a lever in my control. How do I resurrect users is a lever in my control. How do I increase the amount of spend per user is a lever in my control, right? So when you know what they're looking for, you can know the elements that you need to manipulate. And if you're looking for kind of a handy framework to use, this is one that we've used for a long time. It's basically Dave McClure's Startup Metrics for Pirates, ARR, that I just put in a pretty triangle. But basically you have acquisition, so users come to your site or app or product or whatever. Activation, they sign up, have a good first time experience. They become engaged, so light bulb goes on for them. Retention, they stick around. Referral, they tell their friends. Revenue, they either monetize directly or through ads or whatever it is. Why am I showing you this? I believe that product people have more control over the funnel than any other person in the company. And that might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but hopefully you'll understand why with the remainder kind of our time together. Yeah, so if you want to take that out of context. Start with acquisition, right? You're like, that's not my job. That's marketing, right? And then once people come to the site down, now it's my job, right? I don't agree with that, and the reason why. One of the things that all these have in common, and one of the things that most of the people that are in kind of traditional marketing do, is they focus energy on these types of channels and these types of tactics. The problem is these are all examples of what we would call a linear channel, meaning they don't scale in kind of an exponential sort of way, right? There's no opportunity for kind of compound growth. More money in, more output, or more work in, more blog posts that you write, more output, right? You all have the power of what are called growth loops. And there's a couple at your disposal, and I think that you should leverage them. A growth loop, Andrew Chen kind of coined the idea, and the basic idea is that a growth loop is something where one group of users turns into another group of users, right? And that is a virtuous cycle, because then that new group of users turns into another group of users. And that is something that lives inside of the product itself. It does not usually live kind of at the way up at the highest level from an acquisition perspective. So what's an example of a growth loop? One would be a user-generated content loop. So users come into your site, some of them create content. That content is relevant to other people in theory, and so you make it accessible and indexable by search engines. You capture long-tail search terms that maybe have really, really small volume for any one of them, but then you add up you multiply that by thousands or millions or whatever it is, and that turns into new users that kind of come in from organic search, right? Really, really powerful, and if you can take advantage of it, that's amazing. So, couple of reasons why people would do that. So if your product kind of fits one of these examples, it would be really helpful. One is when people are researching or planning something. So I don't know if any of you have kids. Anyone's ever heard of the Pinterest party? That is this idea of, like, birthday parties used to be like go to Chuck E. Cheese and then half the kids get sick and then whatever. But then you call it good. Now you have to do a Pinterest party, which means it starts like 3 months in advance, and it's basically like planning a wedding every time. And it's because of social pressure, and if you live in the North Shore, like I do, where a bunch of type A people all move in the same neighborhood and they start to breed and then they start to channel it into their kids, you know, the need to research how to have the best ninja party ever is really important. So researching is one. Another one is status, right? So I want to be YouTube, or not YouTube, I want to be Yelp Elite, right? And so I'm going to create more artifacts on the site so that I gain some sort of kind of status. That's another one. And then another one is to financials. So like in the case of Glassdoor, where they say, hey, create some user-generated content, and then you'll unlock unlimited salary research, right, for free. That's a really strong incentive for me. Instead of having to pay for that, I will gladly do that. So people actually do things like this. This is a company called Myself, where a whole bunch of people work at Myself, and they leave reviews of what it's like to work at Myself, and it's just so they can unlock the feature. But anyway, so those are a couple of reasons why your product might, if it fits any of those kind of needs where people are posting content that would be helpful to other people doing research, if people are posting content because it would create some sort of status for themselves, or if there's some financial benefit you can find, that'd be great. The reason why it's powerful is that it's compounding. For anybody that knows anything about SEO, SEO is a winner-take-most game. So this is the average click-through rate based on your search engine position on a page, right? And it's really high if you're position 1, position 2, position 3, and then kind of drops down from there, which maps probably to how you use Google. The really powerful thing about this growth loop is that for these long-tail phrases, so people, for example, people who type in Sean Johnson, mostly it's me. But sometimes it's, and usually it's like, you must have meant the gymnast. And then it autocorrects you. But there are phrases that are within your user-generated content lends itself perfectly to long-tail search. It lends itself to these phrases that get maybe 10 searches a month or 20 searches a month or whatever. Those phrases are phrases that you can 100% own and get position 1, position 2, position 3. So if you're a B2B or a marketplace business where you're showing business listings, for example, right, you're probably going to be better at SEO than the local business will. And so you're going to show up, if not in position 1, you can show up in position 2 pretty easily. That's why companies like Yelp have been so successful. That's why companies like Glassdoor have been so successful. That's why companies like Home Advisor have been so successful. So there's a lot of examples of kind of how you can leverage that. Variables to think about as it relates to this. How do I get more people to create more content? How do I get more people to go from not creating content to creating content? One example from Quora I really liked is their search. If you type into their search a question that hasn't been asked before, rather than just saying, sorry, there's no search results, they say, hey, no one's actually asked this question before, why don't you go ahead and ask it? And they pre-populate the question title with your search query, so now all you have to do is hit submit, and you go from being a content consumer to a content creator, right? So that can grease the wheels for more user-generated content. The other thing you can do is think about how you can layer in multiple types of user-generated content to increase frequency. So YouTube, for the longest time, not YouTube, LinkedIn, for a long time, had a really powerful growth loop in the form of your profile, but it was only one. A user only had one artifact that they were creating. And so they started layering in other stuff like Pulse, or these are, they're content publishing platform. And now I have this strong incentive to kind of create more and more content. You're creating visibility to my audience. And now I'm creating a whole bunch more opportunities for LinkedIn to start ranking for long-tail search phrases. And then how can you increase the percentage of users who share that content? How can you increase the frequency in which I share that content? And understanding the platforms through which I share that content. So for example, social tends to have a really short half-life, and you want to keep that in mind. So TikTok is an example of a platform where people create content and then they share it usually via social. Very short half-life though. So frequency of shares matters a ton for them. Versus someone like Home Advisor, because they are leveraging organic search primarily, that single artifact has a much, much longer lifespan. And in fact, it gets progressively more valuable over time because, again, the way search engines work, there's this idea of domain authority or PageRank, where the longer you've been around, the more links you have coming in, the more authoritative you are. And the more authoritative you are, the higher you rank in the search engines for all phrases. And so while a strategy like this might not pay huge dividends for you in the very beginning, over time it pays better and better dividends, and so every artifact becomes more valuable over time. So it's a really, really powerful tool. And you can model all of this out. I'm a huge fan of modeling. Every single one of the steps within that loop can be broken down, and that's a lever that I can leverage. So the percentage of people who go from a content consumer to a content creator, the number of pieces of content they create, the percentage of people who create a piece of content and then share it, the number of times they share, the number of people that they send it to, all of those, the click-through rate on that share, all of those are variables that you as product people can look at and influence to improve the effectiveness of the underlying loop. The other most common loop that people are aware of is referral. This is what people talk about power marketing and all that kind of stuff. Pretty straightforward. Percentage of your new users will invite friends, percentage of them will click on those invites, and the percentage of them will sign up, right? Different types of products tend to have different benefits there too. So there's personal utility where the product becomes more valuable to me, the more people that I get into it. It ramps up pretty quickly, and then it starts to kind of taper off eventually in terms of kind of how big you can get using this tool. It's really, really valuable. This is what we call sort of it's double symmetric in the sense that for every new user, if they start creating artifacts that make the product more beneficial to me, that creates a loop that's sort of self-reinforcing where now I'm going to start inviting more people in, and they start creating more content that continues to make it more valuable to me, and so it goes. Slack being the perfect example of this. Like the more people are in Slack, the more useful the product becomes to me, right? So there's a couple examples. Obviously, if your product lends itself well to this, try to grease the wheels for referral during onboarding. Make it as simple as possible. Slack does a lot of really smart things. They limit it to 3. They have that button to add another invitation. They allow you to skip this for now. They have that checkbox where it's like, hey, you're using this for your company. Why not just let other people who have that domain opt in automatically? That's a super smart idea, right? That your designer probably isn't going to think of, and in a lot of cases, the programmers aren't going to think of. So that's a value add that you can sort of bring to the table there. But don't just think about onboarding. You also want to think about other opportunities within the product. This is Asana. Asana does something called they provide single player utility, where it's basically a to-do list app for me. But within any single to-do list item, I have the ability to assign it, right? Where I can just add an email address, and now that's another invite loop, right? So there's multiple opportunities inside of the Asana product for me to create a referral opportunity. And then, oh no, battery. Cool. Okay. And then this is an example of like when people talk about growth hacking, this is like one of the famous growth hacks was Airbnb built itself initially on the back of Craigslist. And what they did, Craigslist did not have an API. They had a multi-step form. Craigslist, or Airbnb rather, deconstructed that form and figured out how to auto-post listings onto Craigslist, right? And so what they did is that was an opportunity for kind of passive referral, right? And that is, again, another example where your marketing team would never in the million years. Think of that. This one's out too. Oh no, here we go. Would never think of that, right? So that's another option for you to kind of add value in terms of greasing this circle. Second one, again, financial gain. When you're doing financial gain, there's some interesting tactics you can apply. Lyft, I think Postmates does a really clever thing where they give you $100 credit for the first 7 days. So what they're trying to do is get you to build a habit of doing delivery often in that first 7 days. And so they give you $100 delivery credit, which you're not going to spend all at once. You're going to spend it over multiple sessions, but they did make it time-based. And so they realize that if I can reinforce that habit loop for you really quickly, that's going to be advantageous to you. Let's try this one. Yes. All right. Another thing you can do. Can you figure out a way to have the bonus, the financial incentive, not necessarily be money directly? So Dropbox figured out the cost of additional hard drive space for them on their servers is almost nothing, but for me as a user, it's really valuable. And so they, rather than giving you money for money, they got a little bit smarter about it. And they said, why don't I give you hard drive space instead? So can you do something like that? This is another example of passive referral for a B2B context. Maybe have like a widget inside the browser or whatever, where it's like powered by. So this is a really common strategy with freemium, where you say, all right, freemium plan, we show the little powered by logo. I'm gonna get a passive referral kind of benefit from my free users. So rather than just having you trial, how can I have free users, even for a B2B product, be my advocates in a passive sort of way, right? And then this is kind of annoying, and so it's also an incentive for me to upgrade to a paid plan. So you're killing two birds with one stone. And then the last one's social capital. That one's the most obvious one, where it's like, I get people in because I want to share. So again, TikTok is a good example. YouTube lends itself strongly to user-generated type content sites where I'm a creator and I want people to kind of come in and like follow me and like me and give me social karma, all that kind of stuff. And again, we can model all this out. We can break down all the individual pieces, right? So the number of inviters, the number of times I invite, that's called branching factor. What's the click-through rate on that invite? The copy on that? What's the channel for distribution for that invite? How is it on email versus push? Those are all levers you have at your disposal to kind of increase the utility of your referral.
I see you ending up with like 1 million different levers. How do you then try and figure out which one has the greatest opportunity to focus efforts on?
Great question. We're going to get there. Thank you for asking that, Tom. Okay, so what about activation? Retention, I tend to lump activation actually under retention in a way. And the reason why is if you can influence day one retention, it actually plays out over the lifetime of the cohort, usually. And so when you think about how retention is usually this lagging indicator, this is one tool you have at your disposal to actually influence things as a leading indicator. It's not always going to play itself out that way, but usually it does. And in fact, if you look at the top apps in the App Store and what their average retention curves look like, obviously the better ones have better curves or whatever. But what's interesting, if you notice this, is that the steep drop off is always at the beginning, right? And so there's an enormous opportunity. If I can nail first-time user experience and nail onboarding, then it'll play itself out over the rest of the lifetime. And so I advocate that you spend almost as much time on your onboarding process as you do on the rest of the product. Because if you don't get me to that core experience where that light bulb goes on, nothing else matters. And so this is a problem because a lot of times your designers on your team, like they design really pretty charts like this for my analytics tool. Problem is like my first time user experience looks like that, which is not great. Or maybe this is like my social site, but it looks like this when I started, which is sad. Or my user-generated content site, like this is gonna be awesome when people come to New York. I'm just gonna build this and people are gonna put in stuff about New York, but that's not what happens. It looks like that, and then I come in and it looks like a ghost town, so I leave, and then the next person comes in and it looks like a ghost town, so they leave, and that's a problem, right? So you wanna really pay a lot of attention to not just designing for the ideal state, but designing for that first time state. Some strategies you can use. Go out and talk to your users. Data is really good at telling you what happened and that your people are bailing. It's not great at telling you why. And so you can either do a ton of A/B testing, or you can go and ask people, and very often you can find out things really, really quickly. That'd be really helpful for you. Another one is, break out all the variables. Again, look for your bottlenecks. And one of the really neat things here is that if we just do like a 6% increase in each one of these steps, it leads to a 74% increase in activation rate, right? So relatively modest improvements in each step along the way can have really compound impact. You can also break it down by channel. Certain channels, and this is really helpful for your marketers, right? Like your marketers often are looking at registrations, right, as their like metric. But if you follow it all the way down the rest of the funnel, certain channels have very different behavior. And so it might turn out that channels that are really cheap to acquire are also lower quality users and they bail. And so you want to be able to kind of figure that out and model that and show them, hey, this is what happens for users that are acquired from this channel versus this channel. You actually might want to allocate more spend to the channel where people are sticking around, right? User testing obviously is a great one, you already know about that. Heuristics are really great, so use a team. This is the Lyft model, a guy named Chris Goward. It basically is just like, I'm gonna look at a page on the site or during my onboarding process, and I'm gonna put on each of these different hats. I'm gonna look at it from a relevance perspective, from a value prop perspective. Am I doing anything that's increasing or creating anxiety? Can I do anything to create urgency, that kind of stuff. You can do teardowns of other sites, and one of the things we do is we have a shared Evernote notebook where we look at design patterns specifically for onboarding, and what are some patterns that we think are really compelling and really interesting. And again, you can model it all out. Then the rest for retention, not to beat the retention drum too hard because you all already know this, but just a couple of examples. Social sites, these are their respective retention rates, and these are their respective valuations. Pretty big difference, right? And pretty directly correlated. What about music, right? These are their respective retention rates. These are respective valuations. Subscription box model, right? This is day 90 retention rates for these. These are their respective valuations. So retention matters a lot. You already know that. Just one other way of visualizing this. Again, the company that's acquiring more users, a lot of people would think that's the more valuable company. But again, if you plan out over time, the company that's keeping the 85% of users instead of 65% of the users is going to overtake them eventually. So, and retention is almost the whole ballgame, right? It plays out in other areas of your loop as well. One benefit of retention is that it impacts everything else. So this is referral, right? Here's my referral loop. If I increase my retention rate by 10%, again, let's just say all I did is increased my activation rate by 10%, so my onboarding experience got a little bit better, and it played itself out the rest of the way. That's a 396,000 user increase because the more users that stick around, it tends to lead directly to the more referrals that get sent, which means more users that can come in. Next cohort. Once I got them in, I want to build habits. A couple strategies for how I go about doing that. One is this idea of that aha moment. Twitter figured out that if I could follow 5 to 10 accounts in my first day, that's really indicative of long-term use, and so they architected their entire experience around that. And what that meant for them was there's a whole bunch of things you could do inside of Twitter. They created what they called a ladder of engagement. They didn't expose you to all that stuff at first. All they cared about in the beginning was educating you on what a tweet is and like why you might want to care. And then they got you to follow some people. And then they wanted to get you in the habit of checking your timeline. And then they wanted you to deepen your engagement by downloading the mobile app. And then, only then did they actually care about you turning into a creator, right, and creating a tweet. And so they understood, like social sites tend to play this out. 90% of users are content consumers, not content creators, and only 10% are actually creating content. So use that to your advantage if you're user-generated content site. Don't force people to try to create content. If you look at Quora, they have a really fantastic onboarding experience. They completely de-emphasize the user. Their whole focus is on getting you to follow topics, and then they show you the most interesting content from those topics as their first-time onboarding experience, because they know it's going to be a long time before you ask a question. All they want you to do is get in the habit of going onto the site and reading answers and thinking that Quora is really interesting, right? One other thing that can be really useful in terms of building habits is break out your product by feature set, and look at, if you don't have the answer to this aha moment question yet, look at users who did feature A versus feature B versus feature C, kind of during their onboarding ramp-up process, and how did that lead to long-term retention over time? And often you'll find that those retention curves look different. There tends to be certain features, if you haven't been deliberate about it up front, that are more indicative of long-term retention than others. And once you figure that out, now you can re-architect your kind of onboarding experience to reflect that. Think about channels you can use from a notification perspective. Email is a fantastic channel. I would argue, think about email not as a bolt-on, like as a marketing tool. Think about it as a product tool. If you're a B2B product, right, and I'm an admin user or an executive level user, the last thing I want to do is have to log into another app to check my dashboard, right? Like, I hate that. So send me just an email with like summary insights. Like that is engagement in the product. You have to track engagement differently and define engagement differently. But don't just think about email as a bolt-on. Obviously push, but just to emphasize that. Boom, 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 okay. This is analytics data on average retention rate over time for mobile apps that have push notifications versus mobile apps that don't leverage push notifications. It's basically double. So for everyone that always says, hey, push notifications are spammy and annoying, let's look at the data. Ask for it at the right time, though. Don't do the thing where during onboarding, I just say, hey, do you want opted-in notifications? And I give you no context, right? Because if I say no, at least on iOS, you only have one bullet in your chamber, right? And if I say no, these are the steps I have to go to and turn it back on, which means I'm not going to do it. And so what a lot of companies do is they ask it at the opportune time when you're most likely to want to be notified of something. Or the other thing they'll do is they won't use the native iOS dialog. They'll ask it through a internal dialog, a custom design dialog first. And if you say not right now, they don't show the native dialog, and so I have another opportunity to ask you later on. Think about when you send those notifications. So Pinterest did something really smart. They used social sign-on, right, which a lot of people were doing. They ingested my friends list to see who else was on Pinterest. But unlike most sites where just like it auto-followed and created that connection right away, they staggered it over time. So you connect with Facebook and say, hey, there's 100 friends that you have that are also on Pinterest. They dribbled those out. So like every 3 days or 2 days or whatever, they made it look kind of random. They would send an email to me and then send an email to you that said, hey, so-and-so followed you, and they were doing this auto-follow thing. Because they realized the power of these triggered notifications in terms of building a habit loop and creating kind of a long-term user, and so they use that to kind of their advantage. Obviously, in-app notifications, that stupid red dot for me that uses Slack drives me crazy, but it works really, really well. And then ideally, the best notifications are a loop in and of themselves, in the sense that the notification compels me to take an action that now loads a trigger either for myself or for someone else. And so Slack is an obvious one where I come in, and then I add somebody else in response, and so the loop starts all over again. Brian Balfour has a really cool tool called the retention map. The idea is basically to think about every single trigger you could send inside of your product. What's the channel or channels you could use? What's the motivation behind the user for why they would use it? And then what's the ideal action that you're hoping to kind of get them to take kind of as a result of that? And then these are some things that you can look at in terms of are our triggers working or not. Again, every aspect of that loop is a variable that you can manipulate to improve the underlying product. What if you have a product that lends itself to kind of regular use? Generally speaking, products that don't have like a daily, weekly, monthly habit tend to be less valuable than ones that do. You might not be able to leverage it in every circumstance, but you should at least do the exercise. So for example, Zillow, the ultimate goal for Zillow is for you to buy a home, right? Which only happens every couple of years. But they were like, how can I create mind share and get you to log in on a more regular basis? Oh, well, what if we have this idea like a Zestimate? And what if we send you a monthly report that tells you if your Zestimate went up or down? Right now I'm creating a habit loop for a product that normally would lend itself to me coming in every 5 years, every 10 years, right? Again, you can't always do this, but ask yourself, like, try to think outside the box and ask yourself, is there anything I can do later on in the product that could create that kind of, at least a monthly check-in habit? And then the last thing is achieving lock-in. This is where you become protectable, right, or defensible. There's three main ones. One is your social graph. This is hard to do, right? Unless you're kind of at this point, LinkedIn owns professional, a couple sites on social, but like if you niche down, maybe you could do it. The other one is obviously data, right? That's really powerful. Switching costs are really high. The one that I think is underrated though is channel integrations. Thinking about yourself as like a platform. And so again, as a product person, banging the drum around integrations. It's not something that people like to think about. It's kind of dirty, messy work. But this is a way where you can achieve lock-in and not necessarily have to do feature development yourself, but make your product more valuable by leveraging the best features from other people's stuff. And then the last lever to think about from a retention perspective is dormant. How can I resurrect dormant users? Huge opportunity, right? 50 to 75% of my users are inactive. Like, what can I do to kind of resurrect them? One of the things you can do is like kind of a version of like the 5 whys kind of approach. So say like, why are people dormant? List all the reasons why that might be, and then think about potential solutions to it. Like treating forgot password as actually like an onboarding flow in a way, right? How can I engage? How can I get active users to engage inactive users more actively? Like brainstorming ways on how you can do that and kind of bake in levers there. And again, retention obviously you can model out. Last one's revenue. You might be thinking, again, I don't have anything to do with that. Not necessarily true. So a couple things here. This is an example of what we call reverse churn. This is a chart where a cohort of users actually becomes more valuable over time. They either turn into more users again, or they turn into more money. A lot of like B2B products, they tend to price things by seat, right, or by user. And it makes sense at the outset. Users, it's clean, it's easy for engineering to develop that, right? You have a user table, you have an organization that has a number of users, let's price it by user. And it's also easy to explain. For certain products, this is perfect. Like if for Slack, everybody in my organization ideally is using it, right? And so that naturally makes sense. But what if you're a product where that's not necessarily the case? Like HubSpot, for example, they don't use monthly active users as their key retention metric. They use weekly active teams because they know that only a couple of people inside the organization realistically are going to use it. So what do you do in that circumstance? Look at like, can you associate pricing with an artifact in the product that's really valuable? So a really great example of this is Mixpanel. Their pricing model is based on this idea of events, right? So instead of tracking their analytics package, for people that don't know, and instead of tracking by person, they track by event that happens. And so it's really valuable because you can break down things like your onboarding flow and every single step within that process. Those are all events, right? But the great thing about that is, as your product gets more traction, more events start firing, and so you become more valuable to Mixpanel, and you start giving Mixpanel more of your money. And so it's this, when you win, they win. A lot of the whole this recent batch of like unicorn companies that are starting to go public, people are getting into their S1s, and one of the things that's like blowing people's minds is how much money these companies are spending on Amazon, on AWS. And it's the exact same thing, right? AWS, the more people use Lyft, the more times data is going through Amazon's infrastructure, the more money Amazon makes. So like it's incredible. So can you figure out a way to kind of align your revenue model with usage instead of per person? And then the last one, I mentioned that like paid ads is a linear channel. That's sort of true. There is a way in which you could think about it like a loop though. And the idea is if you plow that money back into more spend. A lot of people talk about this ratio of lifetime value to acquisition cost, right? And if I were to say, hey, there's 2 different companies. One has, they get $4 in lifetime value for every dollar they spend on acquisition cost. The other one gets $3 for acquisition cost. Which company is going to grow faster? Most people would probably say 4 to 1, right? But there's a missing variable here, and that is velocity. How quickly do I get that? And just to visualize this, let's say I'm a SaaS product that charges $10 a month or whatever, or no, $100 a month, and it costs me $1,000 to acquire them. It's going to take me 10 months to recoup my ad spend, right? Versus, let's say as a product team, you said, hey, why don't we build an annual plan where you prepay up front, and maybe we even, we save you a month or two of cost by prepaying. What this does now is it recoups all my ad spend in month 1. So now I can take that money and I can redeploy that back into acquiring more users. And so company A and company B B has more capital to burn, that means that they can grow faster, right? And so something like that you might not necessarily think of as a product team, you can leverage to influence the amount of money that your acquisition team is going to have to spend and the ability for your company to grow. And again, you can model out. So, last thing, you've seen me keep mentioning modeling out. I think your most powerful tool is going to be your growth model. You can take that out. That sounded like a good joke. Last thing. Models do a bunch of things for you. They help you predict the future. They help you set goals. They help you prioritize. They help you, what we do, to answer the question earlier, we use these to do what we call sensitivity analysis. So we build out a really robust model for all 5 of those levers, and then we say, okay, here's our backlog of potential features we could build or potential ideas that we could explore. Let's make a hypothesis for what aspect of the model we think that is going to influence. And let's just make a guess of how much we think it's going to influence. And then we look at feature A versus feature B and what impact that's going to have. And now let's see, which one do we think is actually going to have a better return? So like if you guys do any sort of rice scoring or anything like that, when you're trying to kind of assess impact or the ROI, you're doing this. The model makes it much, much more accurate for you, or at least much more predictive. And so I'm a huge believer in models. We actually have an example model. You can go to this URL, and you can download our model and play with it. But yeah, you can't improve what you don't measure, so take advantage of that. That's it. That's all I got.
Sean, thank you so much. Your timing was excellent. I was about to say, hey, we're out of time.